1920s, Reverend Louis B. Fisher said, "Universalists are often asked to tell where they stand. The only answer is that we do not stand at all. We move." Over the years, we have moved theologically from two denominations that were firmly in the liberal Christian camp to a combined force that embraces atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Christians, pagans, religious naturalists, humanists, and folks whose theology changes from one minute to the next. But now we are moving in a more literal sense. Our national headquarters is moving from 25 Beacon Street in Boston to 24 Farnsworth Street. What does this move mean to us out here on the elbow of Cape Cod? We are stretching our resources to make our old building more accessible to those with mobility impairments, putting up with some dust and inconvenience. What does the move of national headquarters have to do with us? I want to talk about this now, and then after the offering I want to invite your comments. The UUA's move is a done deal, a decision which has been made by the leadership after considerable study, but I know that many of us have mixed feelings about it. I do myself, as will become apparent in a minute. The UUA has asked congregations to make October 6th Join the Move Sunday, and I willingly agreed, not necessarily as an endorsement of the move, which I didn't ask for, but because I think we ought to remember periodically that we are part of a larger movement. I want to leave time at the end of the service for each of us to speak our piece on this issue. In preparation for the sermon, I asked for a tour of 24 Farnsworth and drove up to Boston Thursday afternoon to be shown around by a woman named Cameron Archibald, whose picture you just saw. She works in the development department. The present UUA headquarters occupies not just the beautiful brownstone at 25 Beacon Street, right next to the State House, but two other buildings on Beacon Hill. One is the Pickett and Elliott House, which is just behind 25 Beacon, up the hill, and the other is an office building at 41 Mount Vernon Street, still further up the hill. All three buildings date from the early 20th century. The large rooms on the first two floors at 25 Beacon are particularly elegant. When you open the door from the street, you're greeted by a large space dominated by a grand staircase. The UUA bookstore is off to your right. If you ascend the staircase, you come into a spacious reception hall on the second floor, and that adjoins the Greeley Library with its period furniture and collection of books and publications of the two denominations going back 2 centuries. Towards the rear of the building is the Elliott Room, a meeting room used as a chapel. These large public spaces are what impress the visitor, but the actual people who work at the UUA are used to working in a series of much smaller offices. The top floors and basement of 25 are a rabbit warren of rooms and that is most of the case with the other two buildings as well. 24 Farnsworth, by contrast, is a modern office building. There are 5 floors, and the top 2 are occupied by commercial tenants and will continue to be occupied by those tenants, leaving the bottom 3 free for occupancy by the UUA, together with associated organizations like Beacon Press. The total square footage of office space at Farnsworth will be about the same as it is in the present 3 buildings on Beacon Hill. While the building at Farnsworth does not have the antique charm of 25 Beacon, it is a warm, inviting building with plenty of windows. The space I saw was completely gutted, awaiting the architect's work. But Cameron was able to paint a picture of what it was going to be like. Location, location, location. Whereas 25 Beacon is at a symbolic crossroads in downtown Boston, adjacent to the State House and across the street from the Boston Common, Farnsworth is in what is variously called the Seaport District or the Innovation District, a neighborhood just east of South Station and separated from it by a body of water called the Fort Point Channel. This neighborhood is home to the new federal courthouse, the Children's Museum, the World Trade Center, and many businesses. It is also home to many artist studios. Why are they moving? The reasons given by President Morales and the UUA leadership you saw in the video are three. More efficient use of space, better collaboration from that efficiency, and better technical infrastructure, particularly internet access. Now, for some of us, that last reason might seem a little less than compelling. As we take our electronic devices around with us these days, we understand that connection to the internet is a sometime thing. But for a religious organization, which wants to be relevant to all generations, it is vital to have consistent connection. What the UUA has advanced in this film really are the practical considerations. What I want to do this morning is to raise a few spiritual issues that I see in the move. Authenticity, holiness, and mission. Authenticity is a powerful motivator in my life, and I suspect the lives of many of you. I remember the key line from the 1968 movie, The Graduate. I've just got one thing to say to you, Benjamin. Plastics. That's setting out a lifelong quest for the authentic, the non-plastic. I admit to a certain antiquarian aesthetic. The house I grew up in, a suburban rambler built in 1952, did not seem as authentic to me as my grandmother's house built in the early 20th century. And when I had a family of my own, I chose to live in a town of old houses and to buy a house built in the 1840s. I remember that when we bought it, it had a heavy metal dial telephone from the 1940s, complete with a small phone table from the same era. When the telephone man proposed replacing it with something more modern, I said, "Over my dead body." I gloried in the spacious room and the high ceilings, though they were a pain to heat. I grew up in suburban Episcopal churches, built in the 1950s and 60s, but when I discovered Unitarian Universalism, it was in the Unitarian Church in Charleston, which dates from the late 18th century. It was rebuilt just before the Civil War with Gothic fan tracery, which you have to see to appreciate. A very impractical building. It had all sorts of problems, but I loved it intensely. In the last 50 years, many UU churches sold their old buildings in center cities and built new places in the suburbs. For all the headache of maintaining our old buildings, we never considered such a move in Charleston. But I think the question needs to be asked, is this preference for old things really a prop to an unnamed elitism or snobbery? There's been much written lately about the class configuration of Unitarianism and Universalism. And as egalitarian as are my expressed values, I do still gravitate toward elite institutions. I like being associated with a denomination which was the religion of choice for the Boston Brahmins of the 19th century, and which held unofficial sway over Harvard University during that time frame. The headquarters on Beacon Hill at the symbolic center of Brahmin power reinforced that association. This elitism is really the underside of authenticity. But you can't eat prestige. A lot of churches moved to the suburbs in the 20th century because that's where the people are. Though many of us secretly fantasize about being an elite denomination, we're actually pretty solidly middle class. The most common occupations at the UU churches I have belonged to or served are school teacher and social worker. Authenticity is a flexible concept, and the desire for it can be manipulated like anything else. King James told the translators working on his Bible to use English that was archaic so that it would sound more authentic. You can check this out. Compare the these and thys and makists and doists of the King James Version to the language of Shakespeare, which was just contemporary, and you will find that the biblical language reads a couple centuries older. When the Christian Scientists built this meeting house in 1958, they deliberately chose a traditional New England look to appeal for the thirst for authenticity in a denomination that was less than 100 years old at the time. We talk about the Christian Scientists, and pretty far out of the mainstream, as is our denomination. People walking into this sanctuary for the first time are amazed to find that it's only a little over 50 years old. For some of us, the feelings toward 25 Beacon might go beyond the taste commenting on the UUA website, noted that she had felt the call to ministry while standing in the UUA bookstore at 25 Beacon Street. I would bet that there are many similar stories. My own career intersected with those buildings on many occasions, and the most notable were my 2 appearances before the great gatekeeping committee of our ministry, the Ministerial Fellowship Committee. Both of my meetings with the MFC were in the Pickett and Elliott House, and my first in 1997 was a panel of the MFC presided over by the man for whom the building was named, Gene Pickett. That panel told me something very important. They told me I was not ready to be a UU minister. I didn't like them telling me that, but in hindsight, I must say, they were right. I came back to the Pickett and Elliott House the next year, and a different panel told me that I was now ready. What is sacred ground? It is where our lives intersect the forces that shape them. Songwriter Peter Mayer composed a great song a few years ago asserting that everything is holy now. On public radio yesterday, I heard a snatch of an interview by Bill Moyers of the great Kentucky poet and activist Wendell Berry, who addressed us at General Assembly in Louisville this summer. Berry said that one thing he had learned from Native Americans is that every place is sacred. He said he saw everything either sacred or desecrated. Mountains are sacred. Strip mine mountains are desecrated. Many churches of a more conservative stripe will consecrate their spaces when they are built and deconsecrate them when they move out of them. I asked Cameron during our tour if the UUA had any plans for a building dedication, and she said they were planning a ceremony in February to say goodbye to the old buildings, but would probably not do a dedication of the new until September. I suggested they consider a ceremonial march from 25 Beacon to 24 Farnsworth, as we had in this church in 1996 down Curl Road. But she said that would not be practical. In the last analysis, what is most holy is not the space, but the work that is done in it. I draw continuous inspiration, as many of you know, from Ralph Waldo Emerson's Divinity School address of 150 years ago. And I'm grateful that Harvard University has preserved the Divinity School chapel in which Emerson gave that address. But it's not standing in that chapel that sends shivers up my spine. It's reading Emerson's words. The words would still speak to me if the chapel had been destroyed long ago for more pressing use of the space. Thus we come to a third spiritual aspect of the move, our sense of the mission of Unitarian Universalism today. We're not a historical society, and the world is not a museum. Though we have roots in Christianity, UUs today do not generally hold much store with the afterlife. And the salvation we look for is not life eternal, but building the beloved community in the here and now. We want above all for our national organization to be effective and smart in advancing our goals. Have you ever attended a lobby day organized by UU Mass Action? I have. And it was inspiring to get a pep talk, a worship service, and briefing in the UUA chapel at 25 Beacon Street before going next door to the State House to visit our legislators about issues of the day. But we could have easily made that trip from Farnsworth with a 10-minute walk or a short cab ride. The physical proximity to the headquarters, to the centers of power in Boston, probably doesn't carry very much clout in the end. So I've identified three spiritual dimensions of the movement: authenticity, the sacredness of space, and a sense of mission. And perhaps you can think of others. The question I want to leave you with is what this has to do with the meeting house. As you can see, we have changes of our own to contend with. We hope we're moving forward in the words of the hymn, revering the past, but trusting the dawning future more. Our LIFT project in particular is a justice project, making our space more accessible to a wider diversity of people. I asked Cameron Archibald in our visit if there was any specific use that the UUA had for money that might be raised through the congregation. that no, it would just go into the UUA general account. This surprised me. In this church, we have observed Association Sunday on several occasions in the last 5 years, and there almost always is a specific use to which the UUA says the money is to be put. The website for the UUA move solicits funds and talks about naming opportunities. What I've decided this morning after taking counsel with one of you is not to take a second collection for the UUA. The collections which will follow this sermon will be used for meeting house purposes as usual. Those of you who wish to donate to the UUA may do so through the UUA website, and I'll be glad to tell you how to get to that. But with our ongoing fundraising for the lift and for the new organ, I could not in good conscience put church leadership behind a request for funds from the UUA when they expressed a special need for them. I heard somewhere that the sale of Beacon Street will more than fund the renovation costs at the new building, though Beacon Street is not sold yet. What I do think this congregation can do is to get behind a naming opportunity. With the sale of Pickett and Elliott House, the UUA will lose its facility named for one of our most effective national presidents, who we are privileged to count among our members here. The Pickett and Elliott House now serves to house people overnight, as well as providing meeting rooms. The new plan is to have an arrangement with a lodging facility near 24 Farnsworth, but that will not bear Gene Pickett's name because the UUA will not own it. Cameron Archibald said that the development office would be glad to work with us to decide what facility at the new headquarters should be named in honor of Gene. At that point, we can start some fundraising, and I expect that many people around the country who appreciate the leadership Gene gave us at a critical time in our association's history will be glad to contribute to keep his contribution fresh in mind. The UUA invites us to join the move. In my mind, we do join this move of our national headquarters with our hearts, wishing them well, not without sadness or second thoughts or reservations, but much as we hope for a favorable outcome from our own construction project. We join the UUA's move in the hope that we all emerge from it with a more effective organization to serve our congregations and to continue the work of bending the arc of history towards justice. Amen.